Thank you so much for joining us. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Joni Parsons. I'm co-creator of Rebel 11, along with Monica Smith. Monica, you want to say hi?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome. Monica and I created Rebel 11 about 5 years ago. We truly believe that when women get together, something magical happens. That there's more, that when we create events and retreats, that we can all have more meaning and joy in our life. And that's really why we're here today. I had the pleasure of meeting Lorca recently and was truly moved by her story of resiliency. And I'd just like to tell you about a particularly tough time that I had a few years ago when all at once, my mom went into a dementia facility and ultimately that was there for a very long 8 years. I had a terrible breakup at the time, and also my business was in a lull. As an only child and as an entrepreneur, this was an incredibly hard time for me. And I have thought since meeting Lorca, what if I had had that resiliency toolbox in my back pocket going through that period of time, which actually was a long period of time. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about resiliency and how to get through those tough times in a better, stronger way. Lorca is all about talking about risk and resiliency and designing a life with joy. And she's on the faculty at Montana State University, and she joins us from Bozeman, Montana today. Welcome, Lorca. It's so nice to have you.
Oh, thank you so much.
It was such a joy. Such a joy to meet you. And, when we were in this group of amazing women, it was so lovely to hear your message and your story. And that's where I would like to get started today. Is I would love for you to tell us the story that truly changed your life and led you to where you are today.
Yeah. So I had a very happy and fun childhood in all the ways. And my father was a college teacher and a climber. And so grew up just messing around in a lot of really beautiful places. And when I was in high school, I joined the climbing team and ended up in boarding school in Portland and at Oregon Episcopal School in 1986. And that was the year that one of our school climbs went very, very hard and very wrong. And we were doing a regularly scheduled school climb, and
that was on Mount Hood, right?
This was on Mount Hood. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a storm came in from the coast. And we were climbing at night, so we didn't see it coming, and it hit and trapped some of us for 4 days before they were found. And when it was all over, we had lost 9 people, 7 students and two adults. And so this was a complete game changer in what I previously thought I needed for life. Right? What do
I? Such a young age. Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
So
I was 16 years old, and that's, at first it didn't show up as like, oh, resilience is everything.
But it didn't, particularly at 16, right?
No, I mean, at first it just showed up as like, I have to get out of this hole. Like I'm in a deep, dark hole and I'm not alone, but no one's going to do this for me. And I just need to get up and out and let people help me get up and out and do my own part. And not even having any idea what that could look like, right? And and it wasn't until the next thing came down the pike, right? It was about a year later, there was another climb with three young men who died, and down in Patagonia, and I had known one of them, And it was just, it changed the framework of the whole thing, because it said to me, it's not enough to get out of a hole, right? It's what would it really look like to be amazing at getting out of holes? What is the right way to be in a hole? Like, not a right way, but what would be a really real way to be in holes in general, right? I mean, there are ways that are obviously we can think of that are darker and harder and that keep you in longer and
Right.
that don't teach you anything. And so it's not even just the getting out. It's like, who goes in to it, and what do you bring to that, and what do you bring out with you? And so that's been the defining question ever since. I never get tired of this stuff. And
So-
the collecting those, all the puzzle pieces for this have formed everything now.
So if you want to hear more about Lorca's story in more detail, we wanted to shorten it up today because we have an hour, and I could literally talk to Lorca for 4 hours or more, and days and weeks. But she did a TED talk for TEDx in Bozeman. So if you'd like to hear that, I'd encourage you to check that out. But Lorca, at what point did you really realize that your life's work was about resiliency? It sounds like, it started, the little puzzle pieces did start to come together for you at an early age, but at what point did you say resiliency is what I want to do?
Yeah. Pretty clearly, it was probably, I would say, about a dozen years ago. And so I had made a lot of choices through the rest of, through the intermittent time that are so useful now, even though I wasn't thinking about designing for this. But I have a background in wilderness trip leading and in working with kids who are really challenged. And I have a master's degree in international diplomacy, which is handy. And
That's very handy, I bet.
And learning languages and taking care of the land and spending time in the wilderness. So all of those things were really marvelous, but it was actually this land that started it all. So I live on a small food farm outside of Bozeman, Montana, and I garden it and I raise animals, and we have an area down by the river that's pretty wild, and that had a big teepee in it, and I was working with death, with people who were dealing with death, off and on. I marry people and I bury them. I celebrate memorials for them. And so, and I could just feel how many people just needed some space. They needed a separation from what was hard, even just a temporary one, so they could get their breath and reground. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do retreats and people can come and spend a day with me. And I really originally thought of it as like, they just need my teepee in the aspen grove by the river. But I couldn't help start pulling pieces of my kind of master toolbox out as they spoke to me, and say, here, try this, or play with this, or experience this, or feel this. And that grew very fast until I was able to say, actually, it's not about the teepee. I can do this anywhere, and started playing with all the different ways.
And that's one thing I really appreciate about you, Lorca, is that you really tie everything in resiliency back to nature, or an analogy around nature, because really, truly, if you dig deep, or if you encourage someone that you meet or coach to dig deep, don't you tell them to go into nature and have that deep connection, and to try to feel in a different way than perhaps they felt before?
Fully. I mean, first, if nothing else, because I believe nature is a full-on accelerator of anything, right? So if you're trying to understand something, if you're trying to feel something, if you're trying to experience something, having even a window outside, let alone going and walking or placing yourself in the wilderness, then everything will be more clear and more beautiful and more intense and more real. And so, but aside from that, nature is insanely, infinitely complex, and we are more complex than we have even the capacity to grasp. And so, and the world and human existence, right? And so nature offers so many just perfect examples and analogies that we can then draw from and then relive them back out with more grace and more directness than we might have otherwise, and therefore more efficiency, and we're more successful at what we're working with. So we're all about that. Yeah.
So one of the things that we were talking about in our conversations leading up to this conversation was when someone comes to you, Lorca, or you're going through your own difficult time, how do you dig deep? And it was such a beautiful, your taproot analogy is so beautiful, and I would love for you to share that.
Yeah. I had, there's a thing that I feel, and I've cultivated this so that it really becomes something that I can actively initiate. But I had someone come by here earlier this week and just share something really hard with me. It was the loss of a child in her family. And as soon as someone hands me something like that, it's as if my system says, whoa, I don't know if I was quite ready for that, but I got this. And it's a feeling of as if I were a tree and I sent my taproot down deeper. It's a feeling of just like grounding deep into the earth. And as soon as I have a deep taproot, then I can handle waves, right? I can handle waves of wind, or I can handle waves of emotion, or without being them myself. And I can stay then with that person and not reject or push away or withdraw. So that even just inviting yourself actually in hard moments to say, is there another layer of nutrients and moisture that I can access at any time, right? And just by the reaching for it and grounding yourself in all you've ever been and all you're going to be, and just staying and breathing.
So Lorca, do you visualize the taproot? Like how do you manifest that in a moment? Can you kind of just talk us through that? So that people, we have, you know, a large audience today, like how would you explain that to them so that we get really clear on how to do this for ourselves?
I think if I were doing it for the first time, probably the most fun way to do it would be to think about something like an aspen tree for a minute, which has really shallow roots that move out laterally, and it has its own cool strategies. But and then think about something like an oak or a different tree that does, or even you could think of a flower that has a really deep taproot, right? And just go back and forth in your imagination, pretending to be one or the other, right? And pretending to feel what it feels like to be shallow but really connected with the ones next to you, or something that just can endure for so long because it has access to all of this richness inside, which we all have, right? And that you can be, and just feel it, and just go back and forth a little bit, kind of titrate and feel how you're both, right? So that's how I would start. And I actually, at this point, I sometimes even actually feel it through my feet. Like it definitely is a downward, and it's an earth connection, and it's a, it's kind of interesting.
Well,
I can even imagine almost the feet in the earth.
I think I'll be a sequoia, and I wish I could tap into that all of the time. But I would encourage,
why not?
And if you want to put in the chat, like what kind of tree you are, that would be fabulous. I'm just going to say, I would like to have the strength to be a sequoia tree. But with that, so one of the things that we discussed yesterday and leading up to this is that, you know, so many times when you're down, and I reflect back on that time when all of those things happened to me pretty much all at once, I was so down. And there were moments and glimmers of a time where I could see hope or experience some joy. But how would you recommend people find that hope during those difficult times? Or do you have strategies for that you could tell us about?
Yeah. But I think even more than specific strategies, I think the most important thing is to recognize that the collection of strategies is yours, right? That you can claim it and that you own it, and that ultimately other people's toolbox is actually never going to quite fit you. And you're allowed to steal anything from anyone's toolbox. Can I borrow that tool? Like, thanks, right? Or I'm going to go get one of those myself. But that was originally, and that showed up for me as an experiential thing, as an experimental thing. So when you are in a place that is so hard and so dark that the minute you wake up in the morning, you can't even believe it, and you wish you hadn't. And when you fall asleep at night, you have nightmares, and you like there's no
all of those things,
right? There's no stopping sometimes. And then initially, surcease, that relief shows up in like tiny lifts, right? Like, I feel a little better when this person's in the room, right? Or, oh, that song kind of makes me feel good. Or it's good just to get outside and move my body a little bit. And it's still dark, but I like that helped a little bit. So you start collecting things that work. Right?
Well, can I share? I think this is a really good moment for me to share something. When I was going through that really dark period for an extended period of time, Hannah, could you put up the poem? Actually, Lorca was sharing this poem with Lorca yesterday, and she was like, this was part of your toolbox, which I didn't really realize at the time, but it really was. I read this poem from Mary Oliver called The Journey every day. And while I'm not going to read the whole thing, I would like to read this last little excerpt. Little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds. And there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save. And that was me. And that was just, that helped me so much because I did take the time to read that every day. And I, like I said in the beginning, I didn't know that that was part of my toolbox. And so do you want to talk about toolboxes? You already started, but everyone, one of the questions that I had for Lorca was, are all the toolboxes the same? I mean, what works for some people and what works for others? So we can go ahead and take this down now, Hannah, but Lorca, can you talk to us about that?
Thank you.
That really helped. When you cry every night and go to bed thinking like, how am I going to get through tomorrow? That poem did help me. It really did.
Yeah. I think, I shared something that in the TED Talk that my teacher gave me. And he talked about how bubbles of normalcy are going to, because I asked him that question, when am I going to feel better? Like, when is this going to stop? And there's no answer. But what he said was the bubbles of normalcy are going to become more common and they'll get bigger. Right. And so you can count on that. And, you'll go back into this for the rest of your life from time to time, right? But that's not going to be who you are ultimately. And so the thing about your toolbox, especially when you start out, and when your toolbox is on the smaller side, like something happens that makes you feel better and you clutch, right? You're like, I got it. Like, okay, I have the thing. And you try it again the next time and it gives you a lift. You try it again the next time. And then maybe the third time it doesn't. You're like, okay. Collect a second thing and a third thing. And the goal is not to have a silver bullet. The goal is that even if you have to try 7 things, you'll arrive somewhere that is a little different than you are right now. And so there is nothing There's no category of things that can't go into your toolbox. So I include poems and writing and readings and books. I include sheepskins and certain humans, and I include places and memories of places, and I include feelings in my body, and singing songs, horses, animals, sheep. Like there's no
I mean, one of the
like
other things that was in my
counts.
toolbox was, I've walked this lake in Seattle for 30 years, almost every day. And, for a while I was like, oh my God, I've just been walking in a circle, for so many years. Like, that is so ridiculous. But honestly, it has saved my life. Like that walking piece of being in nature every morning with my two dogs has truly been, not just during hard times, but in happy times, it's been my toolbox regimen on a daily basis. So one of the next questions I had is, how do you maintain this resilience mindset? But you kind of touched on that a bit, that it's a collection of all of these things. What else would you add to that?
I would say that this is one of those places where small things completely matter. You want a large density of steady support from every single part of your life, right? Mm-hmm. So everything from the kinds of humans that you have and the boundaries that you set, to the colors that make you happy, to the health that you can foster, to the connection you have, your capacity to listen to your own body, because it's never gonna lie to you. And so this is one of those places where you can adopt a lot of small things that raise the water level of the emergent available energy that you have. Mm-hmm. And as every time that water level goes up, you have a better view and more options and more openness. So this is the constant invitation, is to give yourself that kind of feeding. And so, not saying, oh, I have to go do something extreme in order to get to that place. Really saying, you know what, that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so I'm just going to put all of these things so that this vibrant resilience is not fed from a fire hose. Yes, right? But it's from multiple directions from all things a million times a day.
So before we get into your philosophy on resilience, I want to ask a question that we haven't talked about. But one of the things that happens a lot of times, and this happened to me as well, is that I isolated. And we, when you're having a hard time, it's so easy to go within and then kind of push friends away, and because you're in such a bad space, you don't want to talk to anybody. How would you address that?
Yeah, I think that if I were in a dark place, and what I would really want to remember is that hard things naturally and invite us to close in, right? And to put up armor. We're designed for this, and it's really smart design, right? We don't want to be hurt, and we don't want to be injured, and we don't want to be made fragile, right? And so much of our brain and our body and our whole nervous system is designed to, like, okay, stop, like no more damage, right?
Right.
So our job then is this constant checking in with the need for what we've put in place, right? Do I still need this? Is this necessary anymore? And in fact, is it actually getting in the way of things that I really want, like intimacy and being able to take risks that take me magical places? So one of the biggest tools that our system has for keeping us safe, I think actually is this weird one of shame. And that because shame thrives as a noxious weed that does really well in the darkness and in isolation. And like, there are noxious weeds that actually their roots poison the ground around them so that nothing else can grow. And this is a great
that's a great analogy.
Graded out. Sorry, there's this beautiful little songbird that's landing outside. So if you are in solitude and you are not in shame, that might really be what you need, right? We need
Mhm.
solitude and silence and stillness, and we give it to ourselves as a gift to everybody around us, right?
It's true.
So that, but if you are in solitude and shame is in there with you, then you reach out a tendril or multiple tendrils.
Mhm.
And it can look like just very simple saying, this is what's happening with me, or telling someone, oh, I'm having like a horrible feeling right now in my chest when I think about this thing. And they're
Mhm.
not going to say, oh, no, you don't.
Right.
So it's a safe way to just share, right? And but the tendency is also what shame is telling you is that no one else reacts like this. You're the only one, right, in the history of the world.
Right. And if you
Who
want more
has,
information on shame, read
yeah,
Brene Brown's books, right?
so great, so great.
Right.
Yeah. So, familiarizing yourself with how shame shows up for you. What are the voices? What is the language? So that when it does show up, you're like, yeah, thank you. You're doing a good job. Like, thanks for the help. And maybe you go like protect something else for a little bit while I'm doing,
I love that so much. I'm going to tell Shame to go take a walk because I sure have a lot of it seems like. So actually my partner said to me the other day, he goes, are you shaming yourself? I'm like, yeah, I think I am. So yeah, thank you for that reminder. That's in that you can tell it to go take a walk. I mean, particularly during those tough times, and even when it's not a tough time, shame does knock its little self on your head or, on the door. So
I mean, this is one of the great uses of, practical uses of great literature, right? You can find all of it.
all of it is
You're
right
not
there.
the first.
Yeah, not the first and won't be the last. So Lorca, this leads us really nicely into your beautiful analogy around lakes. And Hannah's on our team. And Hannah, if you would bring up the beautiful image that Lorca gave us. So let's talk about your lake philosophy and mindset.
So what I want to do with this right now is I just want to invite you to just notice how you feel when you look at this lake, right? And when I say how you feel, I actually mean like how you feel in your body, and even how you would feel if you were there. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Breathing space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's instant flow, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And there's no like, oh, let me figure this out. Like your system is telling you, right? Yeah, grounded, that there's a protected low spot. And there's all this life. And if we look at it purely from a scientific point of view, let's just notice that there's a lot of different kinds of life, and that this is an ecosystem that is both nested in a larger ecosystem and whole in itself. It's complete. There's a completeness to it, right? And so we can look and we can say, hey, you know what? There's a lot that's working here, right? There's a lot that's working here if, for example, it's not completely gunked over with algae, or if it's not empty, or if it were toxic and all the plants were dead, or if there were no attraction, to things like elk and birds and fish in there. And so just notice that an ecosystem that is healthy and that is functioning, where all the parts are feeding one to the other, is beautiful. It is just beautiful, right? Naturally, and it is attracting to anybody who has their eyes open. And this is really how I see any natural system that works, that I am an ecosystem, and that the more beauty there is, the more felt and seen, the more likely it is that this is actually a good system, that it's working beautifully, and that all the pieces are taking care of the other pieces. And so we have so much to learn. Like, how does that work, right? How can we start to ask ourselves, if I am a container for flow, And I'm constantly being fed from all these different directions, like a lake is. And then I fill up to a certain point and I naturally feed out into the world. Oh, like there's no effort there, right? It's just gravity and a little bit of, a little bit of design here and there. There's more than one flow even maybe out. And I'm being filled from glaciers that are higher up that just flow down and fill me up. And there's weather that comes in and rain and snow. And then there's springs that come up right up from underneath inside, right? And they just fill me completely. And then this mix of all these beautiful kinds of feeding makes a really unique way in which when, that water then passes beyond me and goes out into everything that I'm tending, everything I care for, all the work that I do, all the ways in which my resources move out into the world, that it's unique to me naturally. I don't have to engineer it. And it feeds everything downstream in ways that I can see and also in ways that I will never know. And my job then has become, and this is how I have lived, this is my job to tend the richness and the beauty, to notice where I'm doing, to notice when it's up, notice when it's down, do the pieces that I can to feed it and to map it. I actually map it on paper. And I do this with others. So I help other people see the health of not just the individual that they are, but the health of the system that they are, because we are so much more than what's inside our skin. And that we have, the same is true for perhaps a marriage or an organization or a company or a planet. And that the extent to which we are honoring the system that we are and the design system's way of thinking is the extent to which we can elegantly add health into everything that we are and everything that we do.
And is that designing your lake, for instance, and the flow and outflow, how would you suggest that people do that, Lorca? Because it's such a powerful visual, and I'm a very visual person. So when you talked about this lake of mine, me, it's like, is your lake murky? Is it clear? Is it being fed? Is it being depleted? And it really, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you're going completely in the right direction. The first thing that you do is actually just feel your way into the lake that you are right now, right? Is it a huge complex lake? Is it a small, beautiful gem of a lake? Does it have a lot of inputs and outputs? Or right now, do you not actually have or need, huge amounts? Right now, I'm on a farm. There's probably, 300 plus heartbeats that I'm responsible for directly or indirectly at any one point. And I'm working in multiple ways. And so it's not that that's not a functioning system. It's only not a functioning system if I'm not also completely being supported by the systems I've already put in place, right? The glacier flow. If I'm not acknowledging places where I'm being fed by chance and weather, and if I don't really nourish the inner well springs that come up underneath me and check in with them and make sure they're doing all right. And if I keep refilling and just keep tabs on these things, then it's a gloriously complex, beautiful, big lake that has the capacity to feed a lot without taking everything out of me. So there's three questions that after you get a sense of where your lake is right now, like, do you have more going out than you have going in? Right. Then you can start asking questions of your lake, and your lake will tell you all the things, right?
So let's talk about these questions that you supplied here. And actually, let's talk about first the visual that you have up at the top.
Right. So the simplest way that I can even do this as a super fast sketch first thing in the morning or last thing at night or in the middle of the day, any point, just when I start to realize like, whoa, my capacities are getting stretched out. Like, how's the system handling this, right? Is the system going into overload or being tapped out? And so I can just draw a very simple side view of a lake, right? And I can notice the different kinds of flows. And and notice like, whoa, there's going to be so much outflow going this afternoon. Maybe I want to, is there anything I might do that would bump up the inflow, now at lunchtime? So the three questions that are very important, and these can be life-changing even if you didn't do anything else, right? But because if not asking these questions is where we end up like completely burned out and not sure how we got there, right? So the first question is, what actually is my current water level right now, right? And there's nothing wrong about this. Like lakes go up and down all the time, right? So you're just scientifically curious. Absolutely.
It's a natural flow, right?
Yeah. So, and you have fully the capacity to answer this right now. I suggest you ask yourself below the neck, at least partly, because your brain has habits of saying, I'm fine. Right? That's my favorite 4-letter F word. Fine, everything's cool. So you just check in below the neck as well. And just ask yourself, like, am I about half full? Am I overflowing? Am I like, how full am I? I'm about 3/4 full, right? And just try these on until you're like, yeah, I'm probably about 2/3 full. Like, okay, all right. And then once you get a sense of how full you are, then you can ask, and what's my current water quality, right? What's this lake look like right now? And sometimes you can answer it very simply, like decent, or oh, not good, or whatever. Or you might even get some kind of layers going, like I'm kind of mucky on the top, but I'm pretty clear underneath, right? And that's really useful, interesting information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the last one is the most strategically important, which is my water level currently falling or rising? Because that's going to definitely inform some of your choices, right, in the next few minutes or hours or days, right? Like if I'm 2/3 full and falling, that's not necessarily a great setup. Right? Because there are people who are going to be asking things for you and from you, and there are going to be surprises, and there are going to be hard things and beautiful things, and even beautiful things that involve change. Change is stress. Good change is stress, right? So you want to be as full as possible to meet the life that's lifing at you, so that you can life richly back to it.
So Lorca, I'd like for you to talk about something that you mentioned here between the head and the heart. And they're competing all of the time, and so many of us live in our head and don't listen to our heart, or vice versa. Can you talk to us about how to make this a whole person?
Yeah.
Because I just feel sometimes they're in such conflict that like I should be doing this, but my heart says this, or I need to go make money, but it's not necessarily what I want to be doing right now. I mean, there's heart, head, head, heart. Like, talk to us about that. How do we control? I would love to.
Yeah. So there's an intermediate step, right? Obviously, it'd be really fun if we experienced ourselves as this complete, like, single entity. And it is, because we all experience that sometimes. But the really lovely intermediate step to that for me is filling myself as a council. So I'm a council, and I have a council table, and all of this is inside me. So you might think of it as sitting down at the table, and for maybe a long time, your board meetings of your council table have been your head sitting at the head of the table and talk, and then saying, okay, I'm glad we had this chat, and they're leaving, right? Mm-hmm. And then our bodies are, over time, are like, why bother? Why even send messages? Okay. Or maybe our heart has been left out of the conversation, or our intuition, or our gut, or our, and then I also bring to the table anyone else who is having an effect, right? So let's say if shame is showing up a lot, I'm like, okay, you're allowed to sit at the table. And because I notice you're talking a lot over in the corner, come to the table, let us actually see the input you're having, and then we can decide how much we want to hear from you, on this particular subject, right? Or, the part of me that's a protector of myself, right? Or the part of me that wants to, jump off cliffs and, with a whole bunch of kids into the ocean. And like that has needs and wishes too, right? And so the more I bring all of myself to the table, the more everyone at least gets listened to, the more everyone, all the pieces have confidence in that they're going to be heard, and they don't shout so loud and they don't try to be sneaky. And the more over time, I just am all of it. So you grow into this by developing this atmosphere of trust within your own self.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate, what I appreciate so much about your work, Lorca, is you give us visuals to tie together, and that it makes so much more sense when we're able to visualize that, like not just the lake, but the council, and that's all a part of you. So thank you. And let's go on to the next set of questions, please, Hannah.
Yeah. So if you look at this map up at the top, this cross section, you could draw a line about a quarter across the bottom, right? So when the lake's about a quarter full, I call that just like, that's the burnout level. And a natural lake up on a side of a mountain, a lake that's that low is struggling. It's probably struggling aerobically. All the animals around it are struggling. Everything's having a harder time. And this is completely how you are, right? This is completely how I start showing up when I cross that burnout line. And the main thing to understand is that I think we have a sense that we can go below the burnout line and it's just going to affect us. But the actual the reality in nature and in humans is, if you're below the burnout line, everything around you is affected. And it's affecting your children and your marriage and your job and how you shop and how you allocate money and your health and everything. And so at that point, the rules change. And you actually don't get to keep acting. You don't get to keep doing the same things you were doing before without the full, understanding that you are not alone. And you actually never were, but that at this stage, if you don't do something different, everything is going to explode or implode. And so these three rules just go into play, and they don't go away until your water level's above that line. So the first rule is no further damage. Right? You could have taken certain levels of hits until you get below that line and still sustain some normalcy and some integrity of motion and some, but at this point you can't afford it. Nobody around you can afford it. And so your job is to identify what's going on and take steps. And that could look like, in extreme levels, that is what happens when we leave a damaging relationship, when we leave a job, when we ignore going to the doctor for something, right? That we say, okay, all right, no further damage. I'm going to see and acknowledge and take action. That action could even look like setting a deadline, right? Saying, okay, you know what? I have this job. I have an abusive, employer, and it's not been worth it for me to cause a fuss at this stage. And now I'm giving myself 2 months. At the end of 2 months, regardless, I'm leaving. And so I have 2 months now to set whatever stage I can, to make requests for help, to envision a clear options. Right?
Those are curating your decisions.
Exactly. Yeah. Second thing, curate your decisions. This is when you're at the bottom of a deep hole, this is not a really great, you can't see your options very well. This is not a place of wisdom. So you're going to feel a lot of impulses, when you're like, I just want to, go to sleep for the next, 5 years, or I want to join a monastery, and I want to move to Bali, and I want to like all this great stuff. Right. And so what you do is you're like, okay, message received, right? And I'm writing it down. So again, you're not ignoring the voices that are at the table. But what you're doing is you're saying, I hear you. I'm working on something here. Let me get the system back in balance. And then let's revisit this. And if I'm feeling better and going to Bali actually is really the amazing thing, we're going to Bali. Okay. Or if I really want to join a monastery, right? Then
yeah.
Okay, that's a conversation.
I have to say that travel has been a huge part of my decision making to make
Yes.
other decisions, or to get away from certain situations. So how about the third one, Lorca?
The third one, you turn your energy back to the lake, right? And you look at all the ways in which you are being filled, all the ways in which those can be enhanced. You look at all the ways in which you're pouring out and ask yourself, do I need to set boundaries? Do I need to have conversations? Do I need to put some dams in place, even temporarily, right? Do I need to pass some things off and delegate some things and quit some things? Because I'm actually not serving anybody particularly well at that point, right? So resign from this, organization and get rid of a bunch of my, email subscriptions and everything that is tapping you down, taking your resources, taking your time, or taking your attention is not negotiable. No, let's put it this way. It's fully negotiable. That's what it is. It's not, nothing is, you decide what's sacred, and everything else you say, you know what, I can't, I'm not going to let myself go down below that line. And that really is at the heart of it for me, right? That coming out of Mount Hood and that level of grief and multiple griefs, and then all the fuss afterwards, and the everything, was there were these moments completely of feeling like I can never ever be there again, ever. And the truth is that's not up to me. But I also know that who I am now will greet something hard from a very, very different place.
Lorca, I just appreciate you sharing your story so much. And I know that this is fairly new for you, that you haven't told this story your whole life. Like, this is something that has become part of your story in the last 3 years. One of the things, and that's really profound, and you can see that in her TEDx talk. One of the things that I think is really important to discuss as our final question before we go into Q&A is, when you're going through a rough time, when you're looking for resilience, is it better to go through it alone or with a group of people? And you had some really poignant points about maybe not going through it alone, which is what I did when I was going through that really difficult time.
Yeah.
Could you share?
I think that perhaps the most generous and important thing that we can give ourselves before we need it, ideally, right?
Ideally, right.
Is some really strong, lovely skills, and first just an evaluation of our own current levels of self-compassion. And this isn't about being nice, and it's not about being kind or being soft on yourself. Or self-compassion means that pain is seen, that suffering is acknowledged first. And then secondly, that we do return to that full acknowledgement that this is an experience of common humanity, that we aren't first and we won't be the last. And that in fact, that there are multitudes who are standing with us and likely also feeling alone, right? So every time we send out the slightest tendril of connection or sharing, or then that is an unbelievable gift. And thirdly, we can add kindness. So those 3 steps, you have done the pieces of self-compassion, right? That you have acknowledged suffering, that you have acknowledged that you're never alone, and or weird or weak, right? Because those are the kinds of conversations. And then third, how can I add kindness? And these tools of self-compassion are equally true as we turn them outwards. Then we have to do them here first. Turn them outwards and just check and see where you're skipping any of those 3 steps. And if in doing this, you will one, it's a natural way of not being alone. But also someone who operates through these 3 pieces and doesn't skip steps either with themselves or facing outward is going to be moving through what is hard with a richness and a beauty of spirit that will not go away as things get better.
Thank you for sharing. So we have a question in the chat about any tips on how to deal or how to heal from the experience of not having support and understanding from family during a dark time. I mean, I think that we've been talking about that throughout this conversation, that there are those moments where you feel isolated. And I mean, would you suggest to, I'm not sure who this is, AA, that to reach out to friends, or what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think the first thing, actually fully and like exhaustively even, apply the self-compassion rules to that. So the first thing is fully letting yourself completely, if temporarily, go off on like, that hurts. That is not okay with me. Like that's not fun. That's painful. That's hurt me in all of these different ways, which I'm now going to list, right? And just don't let any part of you feel like it can't speak, right? And journaling is really great for this, or talking into a recorder and walking at the same time. I love notes for
and
that.
then do you listen to it?
Most of the time I don't. Sometimes I do. Or I actually do. Sometimes I talk into a shoot, what's it called? Well, I just use the phone notes and then you can just press a button and it'll transcribe
on your iPhone.
Right. Yeah. So transcribing is really cool because you can go back and look at it, or you can just completely ignore it. And the important thing, I think, is doing it. Morning pages are awesome.
Yeah, yes. Morning pages are awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, they do that. And so, first acknowledging and then applying and, going through all the steps, right? So one, am I the only person who has ever felt completely unconnected, to my family, and unsupported and unseen, right? And actually, I'll tell you, I can think of 4 people right now in the last month who've said this to me. So you're not alone. Yeah. And it does it mean you have to go and just like, nah, to everybody? No, you fully get to say when and how you're going to tell your own story. But, just feeling that this is a thing that happens and that it's not, but the next step, and add kindness to yourself. But the next step that for me is really the more fun and exciting part is then getting super curious and saying, what would it look like? What would having a created family look like? How might someone go play with that?
And then go create your own family.
Who would I want in it, right?
Yeah.
And what would it be to be living a life where I don't need that first family to make me feel whole, because I am so whole. And I still have them, and we deal with each other, but I'm not broken in a way that I'm expecting them to fix.
That's beautiful. Yeah, let's stop there. I think that's just such a beautiful way to end our conversation. Lorca, I'm so thrilled to have you here today. And we're going to do some quick fun questions for you, just to end on a really kind of fun, happy note. We're going to go like this. So really fast. So just to get everybody in a new mood and to say, Here's your questions, Lorca. What would you tell your 25-year-old self?
Oh, honey.
It's going to be
No,
okay. What would that be?
that, but also like, you cannot believe how much fun this is going to be. Like, so much fun.
Oh, that's
Like,
awesome.
get ready.
Get ready.
Get those
Woo!
muscles
Okay.
ready.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. What is one daily routine that you can't live without?
Oh, actually, I'm just going to kind of turn that a little bit on its head. I mean, I do check in with my tarn regularly, but the other thing I do is,
The
rather
tarn
than,
is the lake, just to be clear.
yeah, the lake,
Yeah.
sorry, is that for me, it's checking the toolbox. So it's never like, this is the one thing I have to do. It's like, what would be amazing right now?
Yep.
Like, and pull something out and do it. So that's, yeah.
That's terrific. What are you reading?
Oh, I'm reading a book called Things That Are by Amy Leach, which is just adorable. And I'm reading a book called Wax Night in Montana, which is hilarious and totally touching me, by Katie Dawn. And
Oh my gosh, and you can tell her she's a prolific reader. So
and then this is another one
one.
that I always have. Ruth Gendler's book, The Book of Qualities. I think you guys would have so much fun with this.
Why don't we
it's a
put
really,
together,
yeah.
Lorca, why don't we put together a list and we'll email that out to everyone by tomorrow at the latest. And I just want to remind everyone that this session has been recorded and will be on our YouTube channel starting later today if you'd like to have more reminders about Lorca's amazing philosophy on resilience. Lorca, thank you so much. I am so grateful that you shared your vision and your amazing knowledge with us today. So thank you so much for being with us.
This has been so much fun, and I love these questions. And I do hope this isn't the last. I would love to keep these kinds of conversations going. So come find me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Monica, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about Revel 11 and what's coming up.